The dust hadn't settled from the stagecoach wheels when Deanna Pierce stepped down onto the hard-packed earth of Dalhart, Texas, certain that her life as she'd known it was over. It was the summer of 1882, and the town sprawled before her like a promise she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. 3 years ago, she'd been engaged to a banker's son in Philadelphia, planning a wedding that would have secured her future. Then her father's business collapsed. The engagement dissolved like sugar in rain, and she'd spent the years since caring for her ailing mother until last winter when pneumonia took her. Now, at 32, Diana had accepted a teaching position in this Texas town because it was the only offer she'd received, and because staying in Philadelphia meant watching her former friends whisper behind their fans about the spinster who'd missed her chance. The heat hit her like a physical wall, so different from the humid summers back east. Her dark blue traveling dress, appropriate for a respectable unmarried woman, absorbed the sunlight until she felt she might combust. She gathered her 2 carpet bags and made her way toward the building marked with a hand-painted sign reading Dalhart Hotel and Boarding House. Inside, a woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes looked her up and down. "You must be the new schoolteacher. I'm Mrs. Henderson. Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Supper's at 6, breakfast at 7. You'll take your meals here until you get settled." Deanna nodded gratefully and climbed the narrow stairs. The room was small but clean, with a window that overlooked the main street. She could see a general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, and beyond that, the endless expanse of prairie stretching toward a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. Everything about this place felt exposed, raw, and real in a way that made her Philadelphia life seem like a story someone had told her rather than something she'd actually lived. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into a lighter cotton dress, and washed her face in the basin on the dresser. The woman in the mirror looked tired, with fine lines at the corners of her brown eyes and strands of gray beginning to thread through her dark hair. Too old for fresh starts, she thought. Too old for anything except teaching other people's children and growing old alone. At supper, Mrs. Henderson introduced her to the other boarders. A traveling salesman passing through, an elderly man who worked at the grain elevator, and a widow named Mrs. Talbot who ran a dressmaking business. They were kind enough, asking polite questions about her journey and her impressions of Dalhart, but Deanna felt the weight of their curiosity. She was a novelty, an educated woman from the East, and she could see them trying to figure out why someone like her had come to a town like this. The next morning, Deanna made her way to the schoolhouse, a simple wooden building at the edge of town. Inside, she found desks for perhaps 20 students, a blackboard that had seen better days, and shelves that held a motley collection of worn textbooks. She spent the day cleaning, organizing, and preparing lessons for the term that would begin in 2 weeks, after the harvest was complete. It was late afternoon when she heard the door open behind her. She turned to find a man standing in the doorway, hat in hand, silhouetted against the bright sunlight. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out his features. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and hair the color of wheat at harvest time. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with blue eyes that held a directness she found both unsettling and somehow reassuring. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who'd spent his life under these big skies. "I'm Luke Ortiz. I run cattle on a spread about 5 miles north of town. Heard we had a new schoolteacher, and I wanted to introduce myself. My sister's boy, Tommy, he'll be one of your students come September." Deanna set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the desks and walked toward him, extending her hand. "Deanna Pierce. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Ortiz." His handshake was firm but careful, and she noticed the calluses that spoke of hard physical work. "Just Luke, please. We're not much for formality out here. Tommy's a good boy, but he struggles some with reading. His ma, my sister Catherine, she passed 2 years back from fever. I've been raising him since, doing my best, but I'm better with horses than with books." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact, and Deanna felt something shift in her chest. "I'll be happy to work with him." "How old is he?" "Just turned 9. He's small for his age, quiet, but he's got a good heart." Luke turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I also wanted to let you know if you need anything, building repairs, firewood come winter, anything at all, you send word out to the ranch. We take care of our own here in Dalhart, and the school teacher, well, you're important to this community." "That's very kind of you," Deanna said, surprised by the offer. In Philadelphia, such directness would have been considered forward, but here it felt like simple neighborliness. Luke nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "I'll let you get back to your work. Welcome to Dalhart, Miss Pierce." After he left, Deanna stood in the empty schoolhouse for a long moment, aware that something about the encounter had unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite name. She'd met hundreds of men in her life, but there was something different about Luke Ortiz, something solid and real that made her feel almost translucent by comparison. Over the next 2 weeks, Deanna settled into the rhythm of the town. She met with parents, prepared her lessons, and learned the names and faces of the people who made up this small community. She saw Luke twice more, both times from a distance, once when he was loading supplies into a wagon outside the general store, and once when he rode past the schoolhouse on a bay horse, raising a hand in greeting but not stopping. The school term began on a Monday morning in early September. 23 students ranging from 6 to 14 filed into the classroom, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about the new teacher from the East. Tommy Ortiz sat in the second row, a slight boy with his uncle's blue eyes and a serious expression that seemed too old for his face. Deanna discovered quickly that teaching in Dalhart was nothing like the schools she'd observed in Philadelphia. Her students came from ranching families, farming families, families who ran businesses in town. They had practical knowledge that would have astounded her Philadelphia acquaintances, could rope and ride and shoot, could navigate by the stars and predict weather by the sky, but many struggled with reading and arithmetic. She adjusted her approach, trying to show them how education could enhance the skills they already had rather than replace them. Tommy Ortiz was exactly as his uncle had described: quiet, diligent, and struggling with his letters. Deanna kept him after class one afternoon during the second week, working with him on simple words. His face was screwed up with concentration as he sounded out the letters, and when he finally read a complete sentence, his smile was like sunrise. "That's excellent, Tommy," Deanna said warmly. "You're making real progress. Uncle Luke will be pleased," Tommy said, his voice soft. "He reads to me sometimes at night from books that belong to my ma. He's not much for reading either, but he tries." Something about the image of that tall rancher carefully sounding out words by lamplight touched Deanna deeply. "Your uncle loves you very much." "Yes, madam. He says family is everything, that it's what we leave behind that matters." Tommy gathered his slate and primer. "Madam, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you come here?" "Uncle Luke says you're from a big city where they have libraries and theaters and such. Dalhart must seem awful small to you." Deanna considered the question, this child's clear-eyed curiosity. "Sometimes small is exactly what a person needs. And besides, I'm a teacher. Where I came from doesn't matter nearly as much as where I am and what I can do here." Tommy nodded as if this made perfect sense to him, and Diana felt a rush of affection for this serious, thoughtful boy. That Saturday, Diana was working in the small garden behind the boarding house, trying to coax some late-season vegetables from the reluctant soil, when a shadow fell across her. She looked up to find Luke Ortiz standing there, hat in hand again, and she realized with some surprise that her heart had sped up at the sight of him. "Miss Pierce," he said, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was in town for supplies, and I wanted to thank you for the extra time you've been spending with Tommy. He came home yesterday so proud of himself for reading a whole page without help. I haven't seen him that happy since before Catherine died." Diana stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "He's a wonderful boy. It's my pleasure to help him." Luke was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Would you take a walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you if you have the time." Diana should have said no. It wasn't entirely proper, walking alone with a man she barely knew. But something in his face, an openness that seemed rare and precious, made her nod. She rinsed her hands at the pump, removed her gardening apron, and joined him in the street. They walked through town, past the church and the general store, and then along a path that led toward the creek that ran north of Dalhart. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and earth. Luke walked beside her in comfortable silence, and Diana found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Luke said after a while. "What was it like, living in a big city?" Diana thought about how to answer. "Crowded. Full of opportunities if you were the right kind of person with the right connections. I taught at a girls' academy there, daughters of wealthy families. They learned French and piano and watercolors, things that would make them attractive wives. Did you like it?" "I thought I did. I thought that was the life I wanted, that security and respectability." Diana surprised herself with her honesty. "But after my mother died, I realized I'd been living the life other people expected, not the one I'd chosen for myself." "And Dalhart is frightening," Diana admitted. "Everything is so open here, so exposed. There's nowhere to hide. But there's also a freedom in that. I can be myself here, whoever that turns out to be." Luke nodded as if he understood completely. They'd reached the creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear over smooth stones. "This is one of my favorite spots," Luke said. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. Tommy and I fish here in the summer." Diana sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, and Luke settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance. For a while they just listened to the creek and the wind in the trees. Then Luke spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I came to Texas when I was 17, he said. "My father was Mexican, my mother Irish. We lived in New Mexico territory, but after my parents died, there was nothing to keep me there. I drifted for a while, worked cattle drives, saved my money. Bought my spread here 10 years ago. When Catherine's husband ran off and left her with Tommy, she came to live with me. We built a good life out there, the three of us. Then the fever took her, and it was just me and Tommy." "That must have been terribly hard," Diana said softly. "It was. Still is some days. I'm not always sure I'm doing right by the boy. He needs more than I can give him, a woman's touch and education, things I don't know how to provide." Luke picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "But I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, I suppose, just keep trying." Diana felt a kinship with this man, both of them doing their best with circumstances they hadn't chosen. "I think Tommy is very lucky to have you." Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, and Diana felt something pass between them, a recognition that went beyond words. "Can I ask you something, Miss Pierce? Diana, please, and yes. Why didn't you marry? A woman like you, educated, refined, I'd have thought you'd have had plenty of offers. Deanna felt her cheeks warm, but she met his gaze steadily. I was engaged once when I was 29. He was appropriate, respectable, exactly what my parents wanted for me. But when my father's business failed and we lost our social standing, he suddenly decided I wasn't so appropriate after all. By the time I was free of caring for my mother, I was 32. I was told, quite clearly by several well-meaning people, that I was too old for marriage, that I should be grateful for whatever opportunities came my way, like this teaching position. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, to her complete surprise, he laughed. It was a warm sound, rich with genuine amusement, and when she looked at him in confusion, his eyes were bright. Too old for marriage at 32? He shook his head, still smiling. Deanna Pierce, that's about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're not too old, you're just right. Something in Diana's chest cracked open at those words, at the absolute certainty in his voice. Tears pricked her eyes and she had to look away. You don't know me. Maybe not yet. But I know what I see. A strong woman who crossed half a country to start over, who's patient with children, who's willing to get her hands dirty in a garden. I see someone who's honest about her fears and brave enough to face them anyway. Luke stood and offered her his hand. Come on. I want to show you something else. Deanna let him help her up, and they walked along the creek for another 10 minutes until they came to a rise that overlooked the town. From here, she could see the whole of Dalhart spread out below them, small and fragile against the vast prairie. Beyond the town, the land rolled away in waves of gold and green, empty and beautiful and full of promise. This is what I wanted you to see, Luke said. This place, it's not fancy like Philadelphia. We don't have theaters or libraries or grand houses. But we have room here, room to grow and change and become whatever we're meant to be. No one here cares about social standing or whether you made a mistake or got a late start. They care about whether you're honest, whether you work hard, whether you keep your word. Deanna stood beside him, looking out at that endless horizon, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt not just the absence of her old life, but the presence of something new. Thank you for showing me this, she said quietly. Luke turned to her, and his expression was serious now. Deanna, I know it's too soon to say certain things, and I don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I want you to know that I'd like to spend more time with you if you're willing. I'd like to know you better. Her heart was pounding now, and she felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. I'd like that too. His smile was slow and genuine. Good. Then maybe you'd let me take you to church tomorrow, and afterward we could have dinner at the hotel. I'll bring Tommy. We can make it proper. Yes, Deanna said, and meant it with her whole heart. The next morning, Diana took extra care with her appearance, wearing her best Sunday dress of deep green cotton and pinning her hair up carefully. When Luke and Tommy arrived at the boarding house in a wagon with a freshly painted seat, her breath caught. Luke wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing, and Tommy was scrubbed until he glowed, wearing clothes that had been mended with careful stitches. At church, they sat together in a pew near the back. Deanna was aware of the looks they received, the whispered conversations, but Luke seemed utterly unbothered. He sang the hymns in a surprisingly good baritone, and when Tommy struggled with the words in the prayer book, Diana quietly pointed them out. After the service, several townspeople approached to greet them, and Diana saw the respect in their faces when they spoke to Luke. Dinner at the hotel was a cheerful affair. Mrs. Henderson, clearly delighted by this development, served them generous portions of roast chicken and vegetables. Tommy talked excitedly about a calf that had been born the previous week, and Luke listened with patient attention, asking questions and encouraging the boys' enthusiasm. Watching them together, Deanna saw the deep bond between uncle and nephew. The way Luke had stepped into the role of father without hesitation or resentment. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Luke came to town every Saturday for supplies, and he always stopped by wherever Deanna was, the schoolhouse or the boarding house or the general store. They took walks, sometimes with Tommy and sometimes alone. They talked about everything: her life in Philadelphia, his years on the cattle drives, their hopes and fears, and the ways they'd both been shaped by loss. Deanna learned that Luke was respected throughout the region, known for his fair dealings and his skill with horses. He'd built his ranch from nothing, through years of hard work and careful planning. He read slowly but thoughtfully, and he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she'd almost forgotten. Luke learned that Deanna had a love of poetry, that she'd once dreamed of being a writer herself, that she was fiercely loyal to the people she cared about and equally fierce in her defense of injustice. He discovered that she had opinions about politics and religion, and the treatment of the Mexican and Native families in the area, opinions she wasn't afraid to voice even when they made others uncomfortable. One Saturday, in late October, Luke invited Deanna to visit the ranch. She rode beside him in the wagon, with Tommy perched on a crate in the back, chattering about the new horse Luke had bought. The ranch, when they reached it, was more substantial than Deanna had expected. A solid house with a porch, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see two men working near the barn. "Those are my hands, Miguel and his son Carlos," Luke explained. "They live in the cabin over there. Miguel's wife Rosa cooks for us during branding season and helps with the garden." Inside, the house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of men who spent most of their time working outdoors. There were photographs on the mantel, and Deanna recognized a young Luke standing beside a pretty dark-haired woman who had to be Catherine. Tommy immediately ran off to check on the new horse, and Luke gave Deanna a tour of the house. The kitchen was functional, the sitting room comfortable with handmade furniture and a stone fireplace. There were 2 bedrooms on the ground floor and a ladder leading to a loft where Tommy slept. "Catherine helped me make this a home," Luke said, running a hand along the back of a chair. "Before she came, it was just a place to sleep between work. She planted the garden, made curtains, taught me that a house is more than 4 walls. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. And she would have liked you." Luke turned to face Deanna. "She always told me I needed to find someone, that Tommy needed a mother and I needed a partner. I told her I was too set in my ways, too busy with the ranch. But the truth is, I just hadn't met the right person." Deanna's heart was racing. "Luke, I know we haven't known each other long," Luke said, moving closer. "Not even 2 months. But out here, we don't have the luxury of long courtships and drawn-out social rituals. Life is hard and short, and when you find something good, you hold on to it." He took her hands in his, and his touch was warm and solid. "Deanna, I'm not a rich man, and I can't offer you the life you might have had in Philadelphia, but I can offer you honesty and hard work and a man who will stand beside you no matter what comes. I'm falling in love with you, and I want to know if there's any chance you might feel the same." Deanna looked up at this man who'd come into her life like a gift she hadn't known to ask for. She thought about the woman she'd been in Philadelphia, always trying to fit into someone else's expectations, always feeling like she was slightly wrong for any situation. And she thought about the woman she was becoming here, standing in this simple ranch house with calluses forming on her hands from the school garden and her heart full of possibility. "I do feel the same," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "I'm falling in love with you too, Luke Ortiz. And yes, I want to see where this leads." Luke pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it was gentle and searching and full of promise. Deanna wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like she was finally home. They heard Tommy's boots on the porch steps and pulled apart, both of them flushed and smiling. Tommy burst in, took one look at their faces, and grinned. "Are you getting married? Can Miss Pierce be my aunt?" Luke laughed and ruffled the boy's hair. "Maybe someday soon if she'll have us. But these things take time." "Not too much time," Tommy said seriously. "Jimmy Brown says his pa says you're too old to be alone anymore, Uncle Luke." Deanna couldn't help but laugh at that, and Luke joined in, the three of them standing in that simple kitchen, already feeling like a family. Over the next months, Luke courted Deanna with a steadiness that made her feel cherished in ways she'd never experienced. He brought her flowers from the prairie, simple bouquets of wildflowers that she treasured more than any hothouse roses. He fixed the step at the schoolhouse that had been wobbling since she arrived. He showed up at the church social with a pie he'd clearly bought from Mrs. Henderson but claimed to have made himself, which made Deanna laugh until she cried. Tommy became a regular presence in her life, staying after school to help her clean the blackboard or organize the books, talking about the ranch and his uncle, and his dreams of someday having his own spread. Deanna grew to love the boy deeply, seeing in him both the child he was and the man he would become. The town watched their courtship with approval. Luke Ortiz was well liked, and everyone agreed that he deserved happiness after raising his nephew alone. Deanna had proven herself a dedicated teacher, and the students were flourishing under her care. It seemed right that these two people, both of whom had known loss and loneliness, should find each other. In December, on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Luke took Deanna back to their spot by the creek. They stood wrapped in their coats, breath misting in the air, and Luke pulled a small box from his pocket. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small emerald. "It's not fancy, but it belonged to a woman who loved deeply and worked hard and never gave up, even when life was difficult. It reminds me of you." Deanna's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring gleaming in the moonlight. "Deanna Pierce, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Tommy's mother and my partner in building a life here?" "Yes," Deanna said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, Luke, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Then he kissed her under the vast Texas sky, and Deanna felt every fear and doubt she'd carried from Philadelphia finally fall away. They were married in late January of 1883, in the small church with half the town in attendance. Deanna wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Talbot had made specially, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Luke wore a new suit, and Tommy stood beside him as best man, so proud he could barely stand still. When Reverend Morris asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only warm silence. And when Luke kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the hotel, with tables pushed together and food contributed by every family in town. There was music and dancing, and Deanna found herself whirled around the floor by Luke, by Tommy, by practically every man in Dalhart who wanted to congratulate the new bride. She laughed until her sides ached, and when she caught Luke's eye across the room, the love she saw there made her breath catch. That night, they returned to the ranch as a family. Rosa had helped Tommy prepare the house, with flowers on the table and the bedrooms cleaned until they sparkled. After Tommy had gone up to his loft, still talking excitedly about the wedding cake, Luke took Deanna's hand and led her to their bedroom. "I know you gave up a lot to be here," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A comfortable life, society, culture, all the things a city can offer." "I didn't give up anything that mattered," Deanna said, placing her hand over his heart. "I found everything I was looking for. I found you." Their first night together was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, lying in Luke's arms in the darkness, Diana felt a completeness she'd never known existed. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not security or status or approval, but this bone-deep sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The first year of their marriage brought challenges Deanna hadn't anticipated. Ranch life was harder than she'd imagined, with early mornings and physical work that left her exhausted. She learned to cook for working men, to preserve vegetables for winter, to mend clothes and tend the chickens Rosa had given them as a wedding present. Her hands, once soft and white, became calloused and strong, but there were joys too, more than she'd dreamed possible. Waking beside Luke every morning, his arms wrapped around her, watching Tommy bloom with the security of a stable home and a mother's love. Long evenings on the porch after supper, Luke reading aloud while Deanna mended or knitted, Tommy doing his schoolwork at their feet. The deep satisfaction of working alongside her husband during branding season, of earning the respect of Miguel and Carlos and Rosa, of becoming part of the ranch's rhythm. Diana continued teaching through that first year. Luke had offered to let her quit, but she'd refused, knowing that her students needed her and that she needed the work too. It was exhausting, managing both the school and the ranch duties, but she'd never been happier. She felt useful in ways that teaching at the girls' academy had never made her feel. These students needed what she could give them, and they gave back their trust and effort and growing skills. In the spring, Luke built an addition onto the house, 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. "For when we need more space," he said, and Deanna understood what he meant. Children, a growing family, a future they were building together. That summer, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She was 33 years old, and the doctor in the next town overwarned her that childbirth at her age carried risks. But when she told Luke, his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears dissolved. "We'll get through this together," he said, his hand on her still flat belly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Tommy was thrilled at the prospect of a brother or sister. He talked constantly about teaching the baby to ride and showing them the best fishing spots and protecting them from bullies at school. His excitement was infectious, and Diana found herself daydreaming about the child growing inside her, wondering who they would be, what they would become. The pregnancy was difficult. Diana was sick for months, and as she grew larger, the Texas heat became oppressive. Luke was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting her lift a finger, and Rosa came every day to help with the household chores. Diana had to give up teaching in October, turning her classes over to a young woman from a neighboring ranch who'd had some education and was willing to fill in until after the baby came. In January of 1884, on a night when the wind howled around the house and winter rain lashed the windows, Diana went into labor. Luke sent Carlos riding for the doctor while Rosa stayed with Diana, offering comfort and encouragement. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Diana thought she couldn't go on, when the pain was so intense that she cried out for it to stop. But Luke was there, holding her hand, his face pale but his voice steady. "You can do this, Diana. You're the strongest person I know. Just hold on to me and breathe." At dawn, as the storm cleared and pale sunlight streamed through the windows, Deanna gave birth to a son. He was small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire household. When Rosa placed him in Diana's arms, she looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt a love so overwhelming it almost frightened her. "He's beautiful," Luke said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're beautiful. You did it, Diana." They named him James after Luke's father and called him Jamie. Tommy was allowed in to meet his new cousin, and he approached the bed with such reverence, such awe, that both Luke and Diana had to fight back tears. "He's so small," Tommy whispered, gently touching Jamie's tiny fist. "I promise I'll take care of him, Aunt Deanna. I promise I'll be the best cousin ever." "I know you will," Deanna said softly. "You already are." The months after Jamie's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, but Deanna had never been happier. She loved the weight of her son in her arms, the sweet smell of his head, the way he gazed up at her with unfocused eyes that gradually learned to track her face. Luke was a devoted father, walking Jamie around the house when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing old Spanish lullabies his own father had sung to him. As Jamie grew, the house filled with new sounds, his gurgles and coos, his first laughs, the delighted shrieks when Tommy made faces at him. The ranch prospered too. Luke had made some smart investments, buying more land and better breeding stock, and their herd was growing. They hired another hand, a young man named Pete who was good with horses and eager to learn ranching. Diana returned to teaching when Jamie was 6 months old, bringing him to school with her in a basket. The students were enchanted, and the older girls fought for the chance to hold him during recess. It wasn't conventional, but nothing about Deanna's life was conventional anymore, and she'd stopped caring what people thought about proper behavior. Tommy graduated from her school that spring, having finally mastered his reading and arithmetic. He was 15 now, tall and capable, already taking on more responsibilities at the ranch. Deanna was so proud she could barely speak during the graduation ceremony, watching this boy she'd come to love like her own son receive his certificate. "Thank you," Tommy said to her afterward, his voice serious, "for everything you taught me, but especially for making Uncle Luke happy. For making us a family." Deanna hugged him tightly, this young man who'd welcomed her into their lives without hesitation. "You made it easy to love you both." The years flowed by like water. Jamie learned to walk and talk, growing into a sturdy little boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's curiosity. Deanna and Luke settled into the deep comfort of a marriage built on respect and partnership and genuine affection. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they'd both lived enough life to know that conflict was part of love, and they worked through their problems with honesty and compromise. In 1886, Deanna gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine after Luke's sister. She was easier than Jamie had been, a placid baby who slept through the night by 2 months and smiled at everyone. Tommy, now 17 and running much of the ranch operation himself, was besotted with his tiny cousin, carrying her around and making her laugh with silly faces. The ranch continued to grow. Luke's reputation as a horseman spread, and people came from surrounding counties to buy his stock. Miguel's son Carlos brought his new bride to live in a cabin Luke built on the far edge of the property. And soon there were even more children running around, English and Spanish mixing in the air as they played. Deanna loved watching their community expand, loved the way different cultures blended on the ranch. She insisted that Luke teach their children Spanish alongside English, and she learned it herself, haltingly at first, but with growing confidence. Rosa became not just an employee, but a dear friend, a grandmother figure to Jamie and little Catherine. In 1888, Tommy announced his intention to marry a girl named Sarah Jenkins, daughter of a rancher from a neighboring spread. The wedding was a joyous occasion, and Luke gave Tommy a portion of the ranch land as a wedding gift, helping him build a house and start his own herd. Watching Tommy dance with his bride, Deanna remembered her own wedding 7 years earlier, the way Luke had looked at her with such hope and love. That hope had been fulfilled beyond her wildest dreams. That same year, Deanna discovered she was pregnant again. She was 39 now, and this pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was exhausted all the time, and the doctor suggested she rest more, but with 2 young children and a school to run, rest seemed impossible. Luke hired a woman to help with the children and insisted Diana cut back her teaching hours. For once, she didn't argue. Their 3rd child, a son they named Marcus, was born in early 1889. The birth was difficult, and afterward the doctor told them gently that Diana shouldn't have any more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous. Luke held her hand and said they had been blessed with 3 healthy children, and that was more than enough. Deanna agreed, though there was a bittersweet quality to knowing this chapter of their lives was closed. Marcus was a fussy baby, prone to colic and night waking, but he was also affectionate and sweet-natured when content. Jamie, now 5, took his role as big brother seriously, helping to entertain Marcus and bringing Deanna things she needed. Catherine, at 3, was fascinated by the baby, wanting to touch him constantly with her small, gentle hands. The 1890s brought changes to Dalhart. The railroad came through, connecting them more firmly to the rest of Texas and the nation beyond. More families arrived and the town grew. A proper school building was constructed, large enough for 2 teachers, and Deanna trained a young woman to help her with the growing number of students. The ranch prospered too, benefiting from easier access to markets for their cattle and horses. Through it all, Luke was Diana's anchor. He'd been right that day by the creek when he'd said she was just right, not too old, but exactly the age she needed to be to appreciate what they were building together. She'd come to Dalhart expecting only work and loneliness, a quiet ending to a disappointing life. Instead, she'd found love and partnership, and a family that filled her days with purpose and joy. On their 10th anniversary in 1893, Luke took Deanna back to the creek where he'd first told her she wasn't too old. They left the children with Rosa and Tommy's wife Sarah and rode out together in the early morning light. The cottonwoods were in full leaf, and the water ran clear and bright over the familiar stones. "You ever regret it?" Luke asked as they sat on their rock, his arm around her shoulders. "Giving up your old life, coming here, marrying a cowboy." Deanna leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "Not for one single moment. This life, you and the children and the ranch, this is everything I never knew I wanted. You were right, Luke. I wasn't too old. I was just right, exactly the right age to be smart enough to recognize love when I found it." Luke kissed her temple, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek and the wind and the vast quiet of the prairie around them. They'd built something real here, something that would last. Tommy was thriving on his own ranch, already a father himself to a baby girl. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with the freedom and opportunities that the West provided. The ranch was successful, providing a good living and employing families who'd become friends. But more than all of that, they'd built a partnership based on respect and honesty and deep abiding love. They'd proven that it was never too late for new beginnings, never too old to find the person who made life make sense. The years continued to unfold. Jamie grew tall like his father, with a gift for working with horses that made Luke burst with pride. Catherine became a voracious reader. Spending hours in the small library Diana had assembled, dreaming of faraway places while remaining firmly rooted in her Texas home. Marcus was the wild one, always climbing trees or chasing cattle or getting into mischief that made Diana laugh even as she scolded him. Tommy and Sarah had 3 more children, and the ranch gatherings became large, noisy affairs with cousins running everywhere and multiple generations sharing meals. Diana watched Luke with his grandchildren and saw the contentment in his face, the satisfaction of a man who'd built not just a successful ranch, but a family that would continue long after he was gone. In 1897, when Diana turned 48, Luke threw her a surprise party. The whole town came, along with all the ranch families and friends from neighboring spreads. They'd strung lanterns in the barn and pushed aside the hay to make room for dancing. As Diana stood in the doorway, looking at all these people who'd become her community, her family, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Luke appeared at her side and took her hand. "Happy birthday, Diana. You're just right, and you always will be." She smiled up at him, this man who'd seen her worth when she doubted it herself, who'd built a life with her that was richer than anything she could have imagined. "Dance with me, Cowboy." They moved onto the makeshift dance floor, and as Luke spun her around, Diana saw their children watching with happy faces. She saw Tommy and Sarah, Miguel and Rosa, all the people who made up their extended family. She saw the life she'd built, strong and real and full of love. The music played on into the night, and Diana danced until her feet ached, laughing and talking and celebrating not just her birthday, but everything they'd all created together. When they finally headed home in the wagon, with the children drowsy in the back and stars bright overhead, Luke took her hand. "I love you, Diana Ortiz, more every day." "I love you too," Diana said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for laughing that day when I said I was too old. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see in myself." "We saw it in each other," Luke said. "That's what made it work." And it did work, beautifully and completely. They grew old together on that Texas ranch, watching their children grow and have children of their own. Luke's hair turned silver, and Diana's face gained the lines that came from years of laughter and sun and hard work. They lost friends and gained new ones, weathered droughts and economic downturns and personal sorrows, but they weathered them together. When people asked Diana about her life, about how she'd ended up in Dalhart, she always told the truth. She'd come expecting nothing and found everything. She'd learned that age was just a number, that it was never too late to start over, and that sometimes the life you thought you'd lost was just making room for the life you were meant to have. Luke never stopped making her feel just right, and Diana never stopped being grateful for the day a cowboy had laughed at her fears and shown her a different future. They'd built that future together, one day at a time, with hard work and hope and love that deepened with every passing year. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the life she'd left behind in Philadelphia, not the years she'd thought were wasted, but the life they'd created together in the wild, wide open spaces of Texas. A life that proved you were never too old for love, never too late for happiness, never past the point of new beginnings. Diana Pierce Ortiz lived to be 73 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the legacy she and Luke had built. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1922, with Luke holding her hand just as he'd held it through 40 years of marriage, she died knowing she'd lived a full and meaningful life, knowing she'd been loved completely, knowing she'd made the right choice that day. She'd said yes to a cowboy who'd seen her worth. And Luke, who lived another 5 years after her passing, never stopped telling their story. He told it to anyone who would listen. The story of a woman who thought she was too old, a cowboy who knew better, and the beautiful life they'd built together in the heartland of Texas. It was a story about second chances and the courage to start over, about finding love when you least expected it, and building something that would last long after you were gone. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of the family Luke and Deanna created. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original rooms are still there, preserved by descendants who understand the importance of honoring the past. In the sitting room, there's a photograph of Luke and Deanna taken on their 25th anniversary. Both of them, gray-haired and weathered and smiling with the kind of joy that comes from a life well lived together. And if you visit Dalhart, Texas, and ask the old-timers about the Ortiz family, they'll tell you the story of Diana Pierce, the schoolteacher from Philadelphia who came west thinking her life was over, and Luke Ortiz, the cowboy who laughed and told her she was just right. They'll tell you about the love story that became legend, about the family that grew from that love, about the legacy that continues to this day. Because some stories are too good to forget, and some loves are too powerful to fade. Deanna and Luke's story is both. A testament to the truth that it's never too late, you're never too old, and love is always worth the risk. In the end, that's what they taught everyone who knew them, and what their story continues to teach anyone who hears it. That sometimes, right when you think your story is ending, it's actually just beginning.